Hey, I am here at the LPC with Nvidia's Tom Petersen, and Tom has come up to hang out with us and our crazy computer and actually help us get more out of the GPUs than we've necessarily been getting.
That's the plan.
Yeah, so we want to talk today about kind of if you're somebody who has a nice rig, not something this crazy, but say you've got two 980s or two or three cards even that are a couple years old and you're running them in SLI, what should you be doing to get the most out of those cards?
That is a great question. I mean, what I would say is you're already going to get a great experience with multiple GPUs running SLI. If you want to take it to the next level, then you can start playing with clocks and playing with overclocking to push it to the next level. So I would say if you really want to get the best performance, you download an overclocking tool and you go to town.
So I feel like there are a lot of little things we can do to kind of tweak that you maybe wouldn't necessarily think about unless you're somebody who spends a lot of time messing with your video card settings. Like my simplest kind of stupid question I have is, say when you're running 3 cards in SLI, which card should you be plugging your stuff into?
Oh, interesting.
Which card should you be plugging your DisplayPort into?
Yeah, well,
does it matter?
It doesn't matter really. If you're going to connect up one monitor, you can connect it up into any GPU that's available. I usually connect it into the one closest to the CPU because I always think of that GPU as GPU 0. But the truth is what that SLI bridge does, which is on the top, allows us to transfer the frames that are rendered from one GPU to whatever GPU happens to be the one that's plugged in. So, you know, the SLI bridge allows you to be flexible on where the display goes.
And we were also talking a little bit before we started shooting just about kind of the way heat flows through your case, right? And you were saying that your top card is actually going to be the one that heats up the most.
That's right.
Which is interesting, so that can kind of affect how you want to configure your SLI settings.
Yeah, another way to think about it, there is a little bit more energy required by the GPU that is connected to the display. So it's probably a really good idea to put it on the coolest GPU. So if you think about the one that's going to be coolest, it's the one that is kind of least baked by the other ones. So if you're in a kind of an arrangement like this where there's GPUs stacked vertically, then the one on the bottom is probably going to be the coolest and the one on top is probably going to be the hottest. So what you really ought to do is probably connect it into the one on the bottom.
So we have kind of a crazy water cooling setup with LPC.
So it doesn't matter that much.
But a lot of people will just have, you know, the stock fan on the graphics card and maybe some case fans that can be blowing stuff around. But anyway, so we're going to start doing some overclocking, tweaking.
Let's see what we got.
Talk about some of your advice. All right, so let's jump into some overclocking.
All right.
We're going to use EVGA's Precision X, which you can get on Steam, although for some reason we couldn't download it on Steam.
I don't know what that was.
It's on Steam, you can get it there, or you can get it for free from EVGA's site.
You just got to register and download, it's easy.
Yeah, so we were messing with this a little bit earlier, and we're trying to figure out how to get all the graphs and charts we wanted to really see our power usage, our clock speed, voltage, all that stuff. And it's a little hard to find. There are these little arrows here. So if you tab over to this guy and then double click, you can get a nice pop out chart.
That's the chart you're looking for.
See all kinds of stuff. So we kind of picked out the stuff we wanted to be able to track.
Just to show them how to do it, you can click on the graph part over there and then it pops up a selector, and this is how you actually select what you're going to show.
Right, so we have GPU 2 turned off because that's our PhysX one. He's not really doing anything right now. We kind of chose all the stuff we wanted to show for GPU 1 and 3. Do you want to go over any of these really quick and just explain why do you want to see each of these when you're doing overclocking?
Perfect. So on the top left, we're showing power as a percentage. And obviously power is one of the most important things when you're doing multi-GPU. You kind of want to know how much power am I consuming and what should I do to either take advantage of some headroom or dial things down. Then there's, going off to the right, there's GPU clock, which is the primary sort of measure of performance. It's, faster clocks give you higher performance, and we need to see what's going on with the clocks. Then GPU usage is telling you roughly how busy is your GPU. It's a measure of utilization for different units, but it's an average. It's a little bit coarse, but it's still a pretty good understanding. If we jump down to GPU voltage is just how much voltage am I applying to each GPU. And that's very important because as you get closer to the limits of your GPU, sometimes adding a little bit more voltage would allow it to go a little bit faster. And we'll go through that. Then the next two are kind of really important because there's power limit and voltage limit. And those are telling you right now in real time what is limiting my performance. Is it power or is it voltage? And voltage is telling you, you know what, you're at the peak voltage that Nvidia recommends you apply to this GPU, and that is what's, you know, basically limiting your performance right now. You're at the limit of what your silicon can safely do.
So kind of like with, or exactly like with CPU overclocking, you can do some stuff without getting into tweaking your voltage,
Exactly.
right? You can get it maybe a couple hundred extra megahertz on a processor,
Yep.
maybe an extra 100 megahertz on your GPU.
Yep.
If you want to keep going beyond that, that's when you start paying attention to voltage.
Yeah, absolutely. Now GPU Boost does a lot of this stuff for you automatically. GPU Boost is, you know, we're going to raise the clock or lower the clock dynamically based on what's going on with the system.
Right, which is your GPU is not running at 100%
Right.
24 hours a day.
Right, and so we're going to clock it down if your system's not busy, and we're going to raise it up if your system is busy.
So one other thing we changed here in Precision X is we went to one of these tabs, I forget where it was, monitoring here, and we set this to 100 milliseconds
Yeah.
so we would get a faster report rate on all our data.
Exactly. I like 100 milliseconds because, you know, if you're doing some real-time tweaking, you can see it much more quickly. It gives you a little better sense of how things are changing in response to your tweaks.
All right, so we're gonna run the Unigine Valley benchmark.
Yep, and let's go ahead and make sure it's like 8x, so AA should be
Yeah,
8x.
so we wanna really stress this thing.
Yep,
So-
and quality's ultra, you're at DX12, yeah, let's rock and roll. So what you see right away on the top left is that right now with that scene, you're running about 75% of the power. So that should tell you right away you're not going to be power limited. In this case, the clocks are running all the way up to 1149, which is way beyond the boost clock. I mean, you can tell over here on this chart, those two little markers, the yellow, the white and the red, are telling you those are your spec clocks. You know, it's your base and your boost clock. In this case, we're running at 1149, which is well above the spec boost clock, and that's the way most of our GPUs do clocking. So the interesting thing about this is you're running between, like, you know, looking at your FPS, you're running like 60 to 70 frames per second, and you're consuming at about 80% of the power. So you're already doing pretty well. Now, if I were going to try
But we want more.
But if you want more, the first thing I would do is start gradually increasing the power target. So you can like pump that up to like 106, because that's almost for free. When you raise the power target, you say, hey, my board is designed to deliver more power, so I'm not going to hurt it. And as a matter of fact, you can't hurt it using the power target because the AIC that built the board guarantees a particular range above stock. So that's the first thing I do. The next thing I do is I'm going to tweak the GPU clock offset. That's the big swinger. Most of our GPUs, well, you're getting really aggressive. That's real. Let's start off with 100.
Yeah, so we set it to 100.
And then let's go from there. Now, one thing to note is
105.
105. Okay, now once you start playing with the clocks, that's for each GPU. And right now we set, and I think you can click that link button, and you can make it for all GPUs. Yeah, and then apply that. Oh, that's no longer linked.
Yeah,
okay, so it's linked. So apply that. That should be for all GPUs. They're now running a little bit faster. And what you can see over here on our clock is we're now up to 1162. We're at 1140 before. So, you know, we're getting a nice boost as we.
So I think I already had 100 applied.
Oh, did you?
Probably.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
What's that number say?
So,
Okay, so small.
Yeah, it is very small reporting. So we had 11, let's see. So we had 10. I guess I didn't have it on. So
Yeah,
we went
not for all of them,
We
yeah.
went from 10 up to 1160.
All right, so we're looking good. We got 105. It looks pretty stable. Now, if you look down here at the reason, I call these the reasons. The first one says power limit. The second one says voltage limit. And what's interesting is right now you're getting a couple different answers, right? One on the power limit here, one GPU is power limited and the other GPU is voltage limited. That's why you got these two different colors. So what might be fun is just for kicks to up the clock a little bit more. So 105, maybe go to 120. All right, and then apply. And now what you'll see is you got a little bit higher on the clocks. Right, you're up to 1175, and now everybody's voltage limited because again you're pushing that clock up as high as you can go. I would say let's go a little bit higher, yeah, like 140 maybe. Apply. So 1188. So we're getting up a little bit higher. It still looks like it's running pretty stable. So this is generally the process. You know, you pick a base clock and then you gradually push your clock up until you figure out what's going on. Now, to illustrate what would happen if you get in a power-constrained environment, let's slide down the power target. So move that down to like 80. Down to 80, so yeah. Now, this is not what you would do to get the best performance, but just to illustrate, if you get power limited, like in this case, we're now saying don't use more than 80% power. And what you'll see is right now we're at like 70-something%, so we're still okay, and the benchmark's starting to,
and then it
Too
goes
much.
down. So that's okay. That's a part of overclocking,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Especially when you're doing a CPU, you keep adding speed, and then at some point you crash.
Yep.
And then you dial it back
A little bit.
notch or two,
Yes.
and then that's where you found
Absolutely.
stability.
So we were at 140, so I'd knock that down to like maybe 130 or something like that.
So I'm gonna get shadow play going again, just so we have
okay.
our desktop capture. So we got shadow play going again. We can see what we have here. So yeah, we dialed down our power target.
Yep.
And it crashed.
It did, but it didn't crash because of the power target probably. It probably crashed because we were just a little bit beyond on the frequency. So let's go ahead and pull up the benchmark again and see what we get. We're down to 140. Is that lower than we were, or is that where we were?
Let's see, 140 on the clock set. That's what we had it set
So maybe
to.
we go to 130, just to kind of keep things calm. Apply that. So this is 80% power target and 130 megahertz offset.
So let's see if the benchmark can handle it this time.
Yeah. Cool.
So far, so good.
All right, and you can see right away you're up to 1175, and everything's voltage limited right now. You're right at 80% on power. So let's lower power a little bit so we can see what happens. We're down to, say, 70% on power. There we go, apply. All right, so now what's happening, you can see down here in the power limit, that's starting to toggle up and down, and the voltage limit is starting to toggle up and down. What that's telling you is that sometimes you're power limited because we set our limit to 70%, and sometimes your frequency or voltage limited because you're not power limited. But this gives you a sense of, hey, if you're in a situation where you're playing a game or you're overclocking and you start seeing the power limit firing a lot, to make that go away, to raise your clocks again, you just slide up your power target, right? And that's really what it's all about. It's very easy to control the GPU, and you can get higher targets by adding more power, and you can get higher clocks by over-voltaging.
So if you're running multi-GPUs, say we have two right now, if you're doing triple SLI, what do you want to do differently when you're overclocking versus a single GPU in terms of the way you're thinking about what you're doing with your voltage, what you're doing with your power target?
I would start off by looking for the slowest GPU. Whatever the slowest GPU is, that's the one that really to focus on bringing up. And sometimes the one GPU may be slower because it's getting heated by the other GPUs. So to make that slow one faster, you can actually slow down the cool ones. That's kind of counterintuitive, but if I had a 3 stack of GPUs that was air-cooled, the top one would be hotter by about 10 degrees C. And that 10 degrees C would actually tend to slow down that hot one. And so what you can actually see is the bottom ones are running faster, but they're heating up the top ones, and they're not actually delivering better performance because they're running faster.
Yeah, so don't think about it in terms of the net megahertz.
It's not.
Right,
Yeah.
because you want to say, limit these two bottom ones, I'm losing 40 megahertz or something total,
Right.
But the gain you get from that top guy not frying is actually better.
Exactly. So when you think about SLI, you should think about the slow guy is limiting my overall performance. So what can I do to speed up the slow one? Well, maybe sometimes slowing down or cooling off the other ones will help that hot one run a little faster.
So let's go into voltage a little bit.
All right. Now, voltage is when we start transitioning from free and you can't hurt it to there's a cost. So if you're playing with any of these sliders like the GPU clock or the memory clock or the temperature, all of that stuff is 100% guaranteed to not hurt your GPU. Now the minute you start playing with voltage, you're going to impact potentially the lifetime of your GPU. If you have higher overvoltaging, that's going to mean your GPU potentially could have a shorter life cycle. And that's just the nature of transistors. If you apply higher voltage to transistors, they tend to evaporate. And if your transistors evaporate,
right?
you're kind of screwed. So if you continue to slide that up, it's not going to change your warranty in any way. But that voltage slider is actually adding 26 millivolts to the peak voltage. And you can actually see that. Where's our voltage? Right here, GPU voltage right now.
So any reason not to just go all the way up on this guy? Other than the lifetime?
It's the lifetime, right? So the way to think about it is as you add more voltage, you're decreasing the peak, the lifetime of your card.
Cool. So we'll go up to 37.
37, all right, so apply it. So what you'll see right away is down here in the voltage, GPU voltage section, we've now raised the voltage peak. And because you were running at the voltage limit, that raised the voltage overall. And you'll see it did actually raise it about 37 millivolts from the bottom. So it's pretty cool. And now, since we're running a benchmark, we've actually gotten slightly higher clocks, because now the clocks are up here at like 1201 versus where they were, which is back there, I think it's like 1182. And that came from increasing your peak voltage by 37 millivolts. Now, another thing to note is it's not like adding 37 millivolts all the time. That opens up a couple more ticks. If you think about it, if there's a curve of frequency and voltage, by saying adding 37 millivolts, you're basically opening up a couple more clicks up that line.
So when you're running, a game or a benchmark or something that's really demanding, you've got that headspace.
Exactly.
But it's not like it's running.
It's
like
not
that
running there all the time, right? It's only running there if that's what's your performance limiter.
So if we had a system where we were running with fans right now instead of water cooling, what kind of temperature increases would we have been seeing when we upped the power target to 106, upped our voltage?
Yep. So
substantial, right?
Well, that's the key thing about GPU Boost. This is actually, I think these are Titans. So we
have Titans. Yeah.
Titans. So this is using GPU Boost 2.0 is what I call it, and it is the second generation of GPU Boost where we added a technology called a GPU temperature target. So if you look at this guy right here, that second line says, I'm okay to allow my GPU to run up to 95C. But you can lower that, which is where, by stock it's going to say 80C, so go ahead and lower that. And you can see you're lowering your power target, but you can click on that little lock button and unlock it.
Them.
Yep. So now we say, I want my GPU to run at 80C, and I'm still okay with 106 power.
So it'd say like that link is kind of a smart target for people who are running air cooling.
Yes.
Where it's saying, hey, if you're trying to hit 80, you probably don't want
your power
that
to
power
get much.
target.
Exactly. So the way to think about that link is, there's a connection between power and temperature. And so what we're doing is actually kind of adjusting them in a way that's normal. But in some cases you may say, I'm totally fine with the power of 106 and I just want my GPU to be 75 degrees all the time. Then no matter what else is going on, the target will throttle you down. So if you're air cooled, the way to think about that is, how loud do I want my GPU to be? Because if you set it to 75, then your fan is always going to blow at whatever that RPM is for 75, because the fan, believe it or not, is actually directly connected to temperature. And that's really the bulk of what it is for overclocking, right? You can play with the power target, the temperature target, and of course we can do the same thing to memory. Our memory interfaces are actually really, really fast as well. So you could probably say to your memory clock offset, add 200 megahertz or more without even thinking about it, and it would just be faster, right? And that's kind of an interesting thing. If you go ahead and click apply, now all of a sudden you're just running faster memory. And what you can see is you also picked up a little bit of power. So now the power is a little bit higher than it was. It's now up to like 84, because part of that power is going into the memory, running at a higher interface.
So one last question I'd say before we wrap this up.
Sure.
For people who maybe don't already have their triple SLI set up or double SLI, they're thinking about grabbing a second card or upgrading to something brand new. A lot of the games that are coming out now we've seen have some really big VRAM demands, right? They're like, we want, you should have 4, 6 gigs. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Especially looking back at cards just a couple years old, that didn't exist.
1 gig cards were huge
so
not that long ago.
Yeah. So what's the right choice for somebody now looking for a high-end system? Is it getting one really, really beefy single GPU card? Is it just going is it going double? Is it trying to buy something that has 8 gigs of VRAM? Like, what's the right choice there?
Well, there's no one answer to that question, of course, but I would say if you're going to be gaming at 4K or higher, or multiple monitors, then I'm going to recommend SLI, a 980 SLI, because they've got a big frame buffer and the performance that you need to drive 4K. If you're at 19 by 10, you probably don't need it, right? A 980, a 970, they're going to just crank a 19 by 10. All the latest games, it's going to be wonderful. So it depends on what kind of customer are you, what kind of gamer are you. If you If you just love it and you want it to be the best it can be, I'm going to always recommend SLI. But it does have, you know, a lot more complexity in terms of configuration and also tweaking to get it just right.
And I would say, as we've seen the overclocking, like, other than considering those temperature issues, doing one isn't too much tougher than doing three.
No, no. The overclocking stuff, I mean, with the overclocking tools that we have from EVJ and ASUS and MSI and other partners, those things have really made it a lot easier. And with GPU Boost now, the interfaces are very simple. They're all the same. So once you learn how to overclock for GPU Boost, you can do it on anybody's card.
Cool. Well, Tom, thanks for coming by and helping us soup up the LPC a little bit. I think we're gonna stop rolling, and then I'm gonna crash it probably.
Perfect.
Just crank it up a little more.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.